Women's behavior is monitored more intensely and sanctioned more severely. Surveillance here does not mean formal punishment. It refers to subtle but persistent forms of monitoring. Who notices, who comments, who judges. What makes it powerful is that it operates through social relationships. It does not require institutions, only shared expectations.
The way of interpreting Islam is very different due to the cultural glasses each one has.
It's become a part of control, right? Because women have to wear hijab even if they are Christians or even they are not Muslims.
Will you also be considered to explore the resistance of the woman on how the modesty are being pushed to them, the idea of the modesties that are being pushed to them culturally?
So when you looked at surveillance, have you looked at surveillance beyond community level, so on the institutional level? So these, education institutions, so on and so forth.
It's also reasonable to include people who identify as Muslim, but they're not actually religious. I have friends who say, well, I'm actually an atheist, but because of my family, I have to appear as Muslim and I have to pray as Muslim, but I don't believe in God.
Initiative. It's a wonderful initiative.
The Global South Network opened new horizons for judicial cooperations.
Global South Network provide a platform for meaningful dialogue and collaboration, fostering efforts to build a more equitable and resilient legal landscape.
GSN network continues to expand areas of activity, further strengthening its impact and reach.
The universal concept of justice compels us to join our efforts, and this is, I believe, the forum for promoting the same goal.
Well deserved for the hectic activity you have made. I am astonished, I am amazed, I was impressed.
May I at the outset commend you, Dr. Ayad, for the immense work that you're doing in the GSN. The Global South Network is a much admired initiative.
كانت جزء لا يتجزأ من الدولة العثمانية.
We are being criticized for doing our job and for upholding the federal constitution. Like I have said in the past, I will not bend to such lame pressures and insinuations.
It's commendable. South Network focuses on all disciplines and regions, creating a bridge between academia, civil society, legal community, etc.
Quiero expresar mi sincero agradecimiento al Dr. Nauman Riyad.
Dr. Nauman Riyad, the founder and convener of the Global South Network. His visionary leadership has established a vibrant forum where judges, academics, and practitioners from around the world can share and exchange ideas. Initiatives like today's dialogue allow us to compare jurisprudence, share best practices, and develop common principles. This has the potential to contribute to transnational standards in procedure and enhance administrative law globally.
I would like to point out that Dr. Riyad's initiatives have not only enriched comparative judicial dialogue, have also fostered mutual understanding of the diverse challenges that courts face in safeguarding the rule of law and constitutionalism.
We can rule when we want in the cases which are brought to us by citizens and residents. In the EU, this openness of mind is increased by the fact we apply, in some cases, same norms from the EU treaties or the EU directives or regulations.
And good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 8th seminar in Phase 5 of the International Interdisciplinary PhD in Progress weekly seminar series organized by the Global South Network. But before we begin, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Nouman Riayat, lecturer in law at Leicester Law School and founder and chief convener of the Global South Network, for organizing and leading this inspiring weekly series that continues to bring together scholars and practitioners across disciplines and regions, and also for inviting me to chair today's session. Thank you, Dr. Nouman. I am Dr. Hind El-Hanawi. I am a senior lecturer at the School of Social Sciences at Nottingham Trent University, and my research and teaching experience spans several prestigious institutions, including Cynthia Nelson Institute for Gender and Women's Studies at the American University in Cairo, the Arab Academy for Science and Technology in Cairo as well, the University of Kent, and finally, of course, Nottingham Trent Universities. At these institutions, I worked on both personal and collaborative research projects. Most of my work focused on gender and social policy. This is coupled with over a decade of gender-focused social and political activism and acclaimed experience in conducting and leading participatory action research. It's a pleasure to chair today's Global South Network PhD in Progress session, and I look forward to learning about the presenters' research and engaging in the discussions that follows. I'm joined by three discussants and peer commentator today. Dr. Levi Eidhamar is the first discussant for today's session. Dr. Eidhamar is a professor in the Department of Religion, History and Philosophy at the University of Agder. His most recent publication, which is also highly relevant to today's discussion, is The State and the Religion in Indonesia, Indonesian Ulama Council Authority on Public Health and National Lottery, co-authored with Ernie Budiwanti and published in Religions. We're also joined by Dr. Soe Tjen Marching, who is the second discussant for today's session. Dr. Marching is a senior lecturer in the Indonesian School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. She completed her PhD in Southeast Asian Studies at Monash University, Australia, after lecturing for several years at different universities in Australia. She moved to the UK and started teaching at SOAS in 2016. Her research interests are the study of languages, gender studies in Indonesia, Indonesian literature and Indonesian history and politics, especially in relation to the 1965 genocide. Dr. Ferdiansyah Thajib is the third discussion at today's session. Dr. Thajib is currently a senior lecturer in the Elite Master Program Standards of Decision Making Across Cultures at the Department of Classical World and Asian Cultures, Friedrich-Alexander University. He teaches psychological anthropology and gender and sexuality studies with a regional focus on Indonesia and broader Southeast Asia. In 2020, he earned a doctorate from Freie Universität Berlin and afterwards joined Leipzig University for a year as postdoctoral fellow with the Children and Nature Working Group. We are also joined by Nabila Rizvi Izzati, who is the peer commentator for today's session. Nabila is a labor law lecturer in Faculty of Law, Universität Gadjah Mada, and a PhD candidate at the School of Business and Management, Queen Mary University of London. Her ongoing PhD focus, titled Gender Biases Within Gig Economy, Exploring Women Experience in the On-Demand Work in Indonesia, explores the labor conditions, experiences and challenges that women gig workers face day to day. And finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's seminar, Raden Hariyani Susanti, who is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Leeds. She's also a lecturer at the Universitat Islam Negeri Sultan Syarif Kasim, Rio, Indonesia. Her research examines modesty culture, gender expectations, women's agency in Islamic societies, in Islamic communities in Indonesia, within a comparative focus on Java and Sumatra. She adopts a constructivist and feminist approach to explore how cultural and religious norms shape women's lived experiences in the global south. Today, Raden will present part of her PhD project titled Modesty and Moral Surveillance, Gendered Social Control in Indonesian Islamic Communities. She will speak for about 30 to 35 minutes, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of comments from our discussants. If time permits, we will then open the floor for 15 minutes Q&A session with the audience. Raden, we're delighted to have you today. The screen is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for the invitation. It is such a pleasure and honor to speak today and receive a lot of your constructive criticism and maybe help in this research. Today, I will present part of my doctoral research examining how modesty operates in everyday life within Indonesian Islamic communities. Rather than analyzing modesty at the level of doctrine or law, I focus on how young Muslim women experience and negotiate modesty in their daily lives. This project emerged from a simple but persistent observation because I know the topic is very often being discussed and maybe kind of late to talk about when we compare it to the feminism in the Western world, but this is like the real life that I have observed for a very long time. That modesty, while often discussed as a religious principle, seems to operate very differently in everyday social life. I became interested not only in what modesty means theologically, but in how it shapes ordinary decisions, such as when to return home, whom to interact with, when to marry, and how to present oneself publicly. To situate this discussion, let me first briefly frame how modesty is typically debated. In public and academic debates, modesty is often framed in binary ways, either as a symbol of women's oppression or as an expression of empowerment and piety. However, these debates often remain abstract. My research asks a different question. What does modesty actually do in everyday life? How does it shape women's mobility, reputation, and life trajectories? These binaries, oppression versus empowerment, tend to flatten complexity. They often assume that modesty has a single stable meaning. However, from my fieldwork, modesty appears not as a fixed category, but as something negotiated, monitored, and interpreted in different ways depending on context. Therefore, instead of asking what modesty is, I ask what modesty does socially. To explore this question meaningfully, context becomes crucial, and that brings us to Indonesia. Why Indonesia? Aside from the fact that I am from Indonesia, much scholarship on gender and Islam focuses on Middle Eastern contexts. Indonesia, despite being the largest Muslim majority country, remains underrepresented. It offers a unique context where Islamic norms intersect with local cultural traditions and rapid urbanization, because Indonesia has a lot of adat and cultural traditions. Understanding modesty here expands global conversation on gender and religion. Indonesia is particularly interesting because it combines strong Islamic identification with significant regional diversity. Islamic practice in Indonesia is shaped not only by scripture, but also by local adat traditions, migration patterns, and urban transformation. This makes it a rich site for examining how modesty is socially constructed rather than assumed to be uniform. Let me now briefly outline the empirical basis of this paper. So, this paper draws from qualitative interviews with young Muslim women aged 18 to 30 in Java and Sumatra, two big islands in Indonesia, I adopt a lived experience approach. Rather than asking what modesty should mean, I ask participants how they understand and experience it. My aim is analytical insight rather than statistical generalization. The women I interviewed are at a life stage where decisions about education, work, and marriage become particularly salient. This makes their experiences especially revealing in understanding how modesty intersects with aspiration and social expectation. Rather than testing a hypothesis, I listened for patterns in how participants described pressure, negotiation, and autonomy. From these interviews, one analytical pattern became particularly visible, which I conceptualize as moral surveillance. So, in this slide, I introduce the concept of moral surveillance. By this, I refer to informal social monitoring that regulates behavior through judgment, gossip, and reputation rather than formal law. Importantly, this surveillance is gendered. Women's behavior is monitored more intensely and sanctioned more severely. Surveillance here does not mean formal punishment. It refers to subtle but persistent forms of monitoring. Who notices, who comments, who judges. What makes it powerful is that it operates through social relationships. It does not require institutions, only shared expectations. So next, this becomes clearer when we look at how participants describe their everyday experiences. Participants, in my first finding, described how modesty extends beyond clothing. For example, one participant explained that if a woman returns home late in her village, she may be labeled as wild. Delaying marriage beyond the early 20s attracts social pressure. Meanwhile, men moving freely at night do not face comparable judgment. This demonstrates a clear gendered asymmetry in how morality is enforced. For example, returning home late is not just about safety, it becomes a moral signal. The label wild does not simply describe behavior, it constructs character. Similarly, delaying marriage is framed not as a personal choice, but as social deficiency. These labels shape how women are perceived, which in turn shapes their opportunities. But how exactly does this monitoring operate in daily life? Surveillance operates through everyday mechanisms. Gossip circulates quickly in smaller communities. Reputation becomes fragile. Women often internalize this monitoring, adjusting behavior to avoid stigma. This is governance without formal authority. Several participants described adjusting their behavior preemptively, like they would leave events early, avoid certain interactions, or they dress in particular ways, not because of personal conviction alone, but to prevent gossip. Because it's exhausting, they say. This is what makes moral surveillance effective. It becomes internalized. Nah, beyond labeling, surveillance also produces unequal moral responsibility. It takes us to this second finding. Women are frequently positioned as guardians of family honor. One participant recalled hearing that if a woman cannot cook, she may be rejected by her husband. Yet no equivalent expectation exists for men. Some participants criticized how religious language is selectively used to justify practices like polygamy. Additionally, beauty standards such as expectations of fair skin further intensify gendered evaluation. The moral burden is disproportionately placed on women's bodies and behavior. Women are positioned as visible markers of morality. Domestic competence, bodily presentation, and sexual propriety becomes measures of family honor. Interestingly, participants themselves were critical of this imbalance. They recognized that religious discourse was sometimes mobilized selectively. However, this dynamic is not uniform across all settings. Participants described significant differences between rural and urban settings. In rural areas, monitoring tends to be more visible and intense. In urban settings, such as Jakarta, one of the cities for my research, women reported greater professional opportunities and reduced scrutiny, though inequalities remain. Migration itself becomes a strategy to negotiate surveillance. Rural communities often have tighter social networks, which intensify visibility. Urban environments provide relative anonymity, which can reduce monitoring. Migration, therefore, becomes not only economic mobility but moral mobility. Yet, even within surveillance, women actively negotiate their position. Importantly, women are not passive. Many pursue higher education to gain economic independence. Some reinterpret Islamic teachings through a justice-oriented lens rather than fear-based instruction. Others advocate for stronger legal protection and political representation. Agency operates within constraint, not outside it. Agency here does not mean complete freedom, it means strategic navigation. Some participants selectively conform in certain spaces while asserting independence in others. This layered negotiation complicates simplistic portrayals of Muslim women as either oppressed or liberated. So this brings me back to the initial binary framing. My findings suggest that modesty cannot be reduced to oppression or empowerment. Instead, it functions as moral governance, regulating behavior through informal surveillance. The key issue is not modesty itself, but how it is gendered and unevenly enforced. If modesty can discipline and enable at the same time, then the question is not whether it is good or bad. The more productive question is how power circulates through it. From this perspective, several broader contributions emerge. This study contributes by bringing a Southeast Asian perspective into global debates. It demonstrates how governance occurs not only through law, but through everyday moral regulation. Most importantly, it centers women's lived experiences in analyzing these dynamics. First, this study expands geographic representation in gender and Islam scholarship. Second, it shows how governance operates beyond formal institutions. Third, it highlights the importance of listening carefully to women's own interpretations. These findings also have practical implications. Policy implications include strengthening legal protections for women facing discrimination or violence. Expanding educational and economic opportunities also reduces vulnerability to moral control. Increasing women's representation in political and religious institutions is equally important. Addressing gender inequality cannot rely solely on legal reform. It must also engage cultural narratives and community-level expectations. Policy must recognize how informal social pressure can be as powerful as formal law. Now, let me conclude by returning to the broader question. Rather than asking whether modesty empowers or oppresses women, we should ask who defines modesty, who monitors it, and who bears its consequences. In the communities I studied, modesty functions as a flexible but powerful form of moral surveillance. Recognizing this complexity allows us to move beyond simplistic narratives and understand Indonesian Muslim women as active negotiators within moral systems. Modesty in the communities I studied operates as a flexible but powerful moral framework. It structures opportunity, shapes reputation, and distributes moral responsibility unevenly. Recognizing this does not require rejecting modesty, but it does require interrogating how it is defined and enforced. Ultimately, understanding modesty as moral surveillance allows us to see Indonesian Muslim women not as passive subjects, but as complex actors navigating layered expectations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Raden. We've got plenty of time for discussions. So thank you very much for this presentation. And I invite the discussants to start with the discussions. We've got plenty of time. So shall we start with Dr. Levi?
Thanks a lot, and thanks to Raden. This was very, very interesting, and I think everything you said, I agree to. So I don't have any direct critical comments to that, but I have some questions. First, you do not define modesty. So that could be, so modesty, it could be understood in many ways. So you mentioned clothes, but it's much more than that. And some concrete things. I have been studying gender roles of husband and wife, so in the marriage. And then one question could be, is it a part of modesty that the wife should be obedient to the husband? For example, just to make one, that she should ask for permission to leave the home, questions like that. Is that a part of modesty? So might be, and I suppose this was short, so some defining there would be interesting. Then you said it's not positive or negative, and I've seen from the researcher, I agree to that. But I suppose that seen from the actors themselves, from the women, most of them would regard the term modesty, whatever you use, which Indonesian terms, as a positive term. Culturally, religiously, they themselves regard it positive to be modest. So that should be, distinguish between what you as a researcher find it positive or negative and how the actors themselves regard the term. So that would be interesting to have focused on. What I have been studying is primarily a religious perspective to see which part religion plays here. And the findings, to make it very short, and I think it's quite similar to you, is that the way of interpreting Islam is very different due to the cultural glasses each one has. You say the differences of urban and rural societies, which I have also seen in Indonesia, exactly the same. And I use this metaphor that they have different glasses, the culture glasses. So there is this dynamic, very complex dynamics between how the culture and how religious texts are being understood. And you might say that in Norwegian Muslims that I've also interviewed, their glasses are very different in that they would say that according to Islam, the husband and wife are equal. Nobody should be the leader. While almost all in Indonesia said it is religious deed to that wife should be obedient to the husband. So then you see there are different cultural ways of interpreting the Muslim norms, but the Muslim scriptures are there, but they could be interpreted in completely opposite ways. So this complexity is interesting from religious, and I don't know how much you go into it, but I find that is also a perspective, even though I find that your perspective is very good and you should continue with that. But it might be also interesting to mention other perspectives, and like from comparative religion is one interesting also perspective on this very complex the complexity of all the interviews you have made. Yeah, so far. Okay, thanks.
Over to you, Raden, again. Did you have a comment before I go to Dr. Son?
Oh, yeah, I can respond. So thank you for that point, Professor. I agree that in many religious interpretations, modesty can also include expectation about family roles, such as the idea that wife should be obedient to her husband. That is indeed part of a broader framework surrounding modesty and gender roles. And also about the definition, I did actually have like the whole chapter about the definition of modesty, but I did not write it here. But maybe that I can add more later. So, and also some participants did refer to expectations within marriage and family roles. You raised a very important point, yeah, about distinguishing between researchers' analytical perspective and how participants themselves understand modesty. Many of the women I interviewed indeed prescribe modesty as a positive value, religiously meaningful and culturally respected, because that is what we've known our whole life. But my aim is not to suggest that modesty itself is negative, but rather to examine how the social expectations associated with modesty can sometimes produce unequal pressures. Yeah.
May I just raise one question more that I forgot? The difference between married and unmarried women you interviewed, and if they saw this a bit differently, if modesty was more important in how to relate to the husband for those who are married. But that's another question that I was thinking about. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levi. We go to Dr. Soe Tjen. Over to you.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Levi. Yeah, it is quite good. I really like your presentation and I really like your argument, but that's what I had in mind straight away. You know, the theoretical backgrounds. That's what you need to, I think, discuss more, because right at the beginning, we need to know what you mean by modesty, what you mean by liberation, what you mean by oppression, and you know, you need a kind of a body of, you know, a solid theories first, I think. And there are a few authors actually that have written about that, like one that comes in my mind now, it's Lila Abulugot. She has written quite a lot on, you know, like women, Muslim women, and about, you know, clothing and modesty and framing culturally situated problems. And also, I think Sabah Mahmood, I think you should also explore, you know, different types of feminism, because there are many types of feminism now. I've just written an article on decolonial feminism and multicultural feminism. I can send you the article. And also there's a good article which I have in mind now. It's called Modesty and Feminisms. This is the JS4 link. This will be a good article for you. It's about modesty and feminism. Another question, another question which I was asking is, so besides, you know, like you really need to get your feminist approach clear here, you know, like what sort of feminist approach you are using in terms of being pious and religious. Yeah. So in Indonesia, it's quite important No, whether you are seen as pious and religious between men and women, this can be quite different. Yeah, for men, if you can be the leader, then that's it. It's just great. Whereas women being religious or pious can mean quite different, completely. Yeah, so that's what you need to explore as well. I think that's all from me. Thank you. It's good. It's good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. So. Since we have a bit of time, might ask you, Raden, again to comment if you have any comment before we get to Dr. Ferdiansyah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So actually, yes, this is my error. So I did not include my literature research and the body of literature and theories. Actually, I did have that, but because like this is really sudden, so I thought I need to focus on like my early findings. So I just finished my interviews. So I was really excited to put like some
to
of
share the interviews. Okay,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
but the Laila and Mahmoud is
Yeah, of
some
course
of
you
the
can't. You
authors.
can't. You know, like you can't put everything.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, because this is only like a short presentation. But yeah, that's
yeah.
fine. That's
But thank you so
Yeah.
much for the
but
comment.
yeah, but it's really good. Just keep going. It's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Raden. And we go to Dr. Ferdiansyah.
Yeah.
You
Thank
around?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over
Thank you
to you.
for the opportunity first, and congratulations, Hariyani, right? Raden is more a title in Indonesian. I also have a title Toku, but no one calls me Toku because I'm Achanese. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think it's always tricky to give comments because um, I'm kind of like parachuting here, so I'm not really aware of where you are in your research process yet. Now, you just said that you just finished your interview, which is great because then there'll be a lot of opportunity to I hope a lot of the feedback here could also help you in kind of analyzing the data. Again, I would share the same question with my previous discussions about the terms, like what is it? Like, is it kerendahan hati in Indonesian? Because we have different terms for modesty in Indonesian as well, which has different meanings and different functions, right? In terms of affects, where I come from in psychological anthropology, modesty is always something in Indonesian culture seen as important because it's attached or it's kind of correlated to this notion of shame or malu. So people needs to know shame in order to, to be accepted by the society. But also there is the opposite of that. There's also arrogance, right? Sombong, which is kind of also a control mechanism, not just for society, but also like for politicians, for instance, like the last protest in Indonesia, where this parliament member showing off their richness in social media becomes create rage among the people that because they don't have enough modesty, right? And then coming back to this idea of politics of clothing or fashioning, in Aceh, where I did my field work, this context of surveillance is actually becomes much more entrenched because it's become a part of control, right? Because women have to wear hijab even if they are Christians or if even they're non-Muslims because it's part of the law. So this is also an aspect that I'm curious about what you think. And for last but not least, for more references, I'm not sure if you have read the work of Stein in 2007, who wrote about village biopower, where his study is about midwives in Sumatra, if I'm not mistaken, and he talks about this production of self-constraint in terms of in response to the power of gossip, the power of to avoid people talking bad about you. And another paper is written by Sharon Graham Davis about sexuality, surveillance on sexuality, which is becoming more increasing in recent time. So yeah, that's my comment. But maybe if you could give me like a clue or like what is the Indonesian word that you use for your research?
Okay.
Over to you, Raden.
Okay. Okay. I can directly talk. Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Ferdi. So to be honest, when I start my interview, it is also really hard to, you know, to shorten the definition of modesty that I want them to perceive just like what I understand, because 20% or 30% of the research participants are very young, still like in college. So I'm also surprised that they never understand or never really heard the term modesty. I thought the term modesty is like something like we often heard, but they never actually understood. So it is something that I really hard for me to describe to them. But for me, modesty is the idea such as malu, ya mungkin ya malu, malu tadi ya, appropriate behavior and maintaining social respectability, like in short, yeah. But I agree that modesty can carry different meanings depending on the cultural and linguistic content. You asked about piety and gender differences, no?
It's more about like how do you see how modesty is not just about social control, but also it becomes a means of like political action, but also political censorship almost or oppression. I
Wait.
was talking about the context of Aceh
Context.
of Aceh in Sharia under Sharia.
Talk about Sharia. Oh, okay. Um, I think it highlights how modesty can operate differently across regions and legal contexts. Um, so I think it's really I talk about it. I think in my body of literature, but I think it's too wide to to define it now. I think. So I don't know. I'm
There's
sorry.
fun. If I can smuggle one more question, is it okay, Doctor? It's more about you mentioned about how educational access could help in kind of like understanding or allowing modesty to I'm kind of missing that argument, like what is the relationship between modesty and educational access? Does that mean that the more people get more education, they become aware of the complication or the complexity of modesty, or what is it actually?
Um, I think what I meant there is not that education directly changes the value of modesty itself, because many participants still view modesty as an important and positive religious or cultural principle. But rather, access to education can expand the range of opportunities and interpretations available to women. So, in several interviews, women described how higher education gave them greater economic independence, exposure to different social environments, and sometimes new ways of interpreting religious teachings. Because what if we, in my own experience, and some of the interviewees, when we stay in one city, like the city that I grew up in, we have like uh, certain interpretation that we carry from when I was born until now. But when I have moved like to different islands. I have been to Java for to pursuing my education, and to Sulawesi, and yeah, to even other country, and they have many ways to interpret religion. So education, in a way, gave them the opportunity to, to choose or maybe interpret the religion in a way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raden. Thank you so much, Ferdi. Well, I open questions for everyone, but right before that, I would just ask Nabila, your peer commentator, if she's got a comment to make, and for audience, please go ahead and either post your question on the chat or just raise your hand. Over to you, Nabila.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Nabila. I really enjoy the presentation and the discussion. I actually make a lot of notes as someone who just passed and defended the PhD thesis like several months ago. I'm really glad to be able to be here and like hear to support, like in a way to support how this been going. I think the discussion is quite, the things that has been mentioned by Raden here is very interesting. I do have some notes when it comes to and question when it comes to the methodology, especially because you mentioned that you conducted the interview in Java and Sumatra, which is makes me wonder whether you will also be included like the local context, as in like the regional context, not just the Indonesian context, but also the local context, which I think will be quite interesting to see on how it plays out differently between women in Java and women in Sumatra due to the different local contexts that are related to them. And when we're talking about Sumatra, for example, like, do we also talk about women in Aceh, as the previous commentator has been questioning, like if you're also interviewing women in Aceh, will you also be discussing the context of Sharia law, the context on how it might make the way they see modesty will be very different on quote unquote the non-Sharia Indonesian woman. I mean, like we all Indonesian women, but like how it plays out in the different local contexts will also be considered. And another questions that I have is actually related with the paper that Dr. Soe Tjen Marching mentioned, because one of the things that pop up in my mind when you present the finding is that will you also be considered to explore the resistance of the woman on how the modesty are being pushed to them, the idea of the modesties that being pushed to them culturally? Because like I do think that it will be quite interesting if we found something that can be explored, as in like, yes, we normalize some of the modesty, as in like it's being pushed to us and we accept the idea of the modesty, but is there also like some sort of resistance that you find among the peoples that you interview? So yeah, I do think that that's a lot of promising things happening on that side. So yeah, just wonder whether you explore on that area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nabila, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mbak Nabila. And congratulations on recently completing your PhD. It's so cool. So through your question, I just now understand what Dr. Ferdi just talked about. Regarding the regional context, I think that is important. In this project, I intentionally included participants both from Java and Sumatra because these regions have different social and cultural dynamics, of course. When I did the interviews, I was like really mind blown of how different women's experience are like in these two islands. Like wow. But my aim is not to treat Indonesia as a single homogeneous context, but rather to explore how modesty norms are interpreted within different local settings. At the moment, my participants from Sumatra are not from Aceh specifically, because when I talk to my supervisor, they tell me to focus on only two province. So, but maybe we can do much more review later on. So therefore, the legal context of formal Sharia implementation is not directly part of this dataset, because if I include that also, it will be really complicated, I think, and I cannot focus. But I agree that Aceh represents a very important case where modesty is shaped not only by social expectations but also by legal regulation. Like really, in my city, dress modestly is not in the written law, but in Aceh it is. So it's really different. And then your second question is about resistance. Yeah, for resistance, some participants do describe ways of negotiating or subtly resisting expectations of modesty, for example, through pursuing education, migration to urban spaces, or reinterpreting religious teachings. I am currently exploring how these strategies might be understood not only as compliance but also as a form of negotiation and agency. So I think your suggestion about examining resistance more explicitly will be very useful as I continue analyzing the data. So thank you again for raising these points.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thanks to all the discussions. Just looking forward to hearing any questions from the audience, if there are any. So either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask a question, or put a question in the comments in the chat. So,
one question that I mentioned, but
please,
for me, it would be very interesting to hear from Raden if you saw a difference of married and unmarried, because they were up to 30, so I suppose some of them were married, and their way of understanding modesty, if that was specifically to marriage and the relationship to the husband, if that was an important part of modesty, while might be unmarried, or if they don't have a partner, if there were other parts that was important to them. Making interviews with married and unmarried women, and mainly see to the relationship to the husband according to how they understand Islam want them to behave towards the husband and the gender roles in the family. So what did you find of the understanding of modesty among married and unmarried women? If that was different, and if that also could say something if they married women interpreted Islam in a different way after being married and into the situation of being married and gender roles in marriage.
Okay. In my current data sets, actually most of the interviewees were not married, because the age range is 18 through 30. So they were often still in education and early career stages.
Yeah,
so because of that, many of their discussion about modesty is more related to public behavior, such as like mobility, dress, social interactions, and reputation. But participants who did speak about marriage or future marriage modesty was sometimes connected to expectation within family life, including ideas about responsibility, respect, and appropriate behavior between spouses. But most of them agree in marriage, when they talk about modesty, is they need to put their husband as the leader of the family. Stuff like that. But
it was a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levi. You know everything. I haven't read the writing, but I have a few questions. I was looking at whether other important issues such as class. I know you talked about, urban and rural, but such as class, maybe sexuality, maybe non-heteronormativity. If these are, included in the analysis, and if they are included in the analysis, how might they change the picture? So this is the first question. The second question, I'm not sure. Again, from the presentation, you might have said it, but I wasn't very clear about it. So when you looked at surveillance, have you looked at surveillance beyond community level, so at on the institutional level? So these, educational institutions, so on and so forth. And finally, which is the interest of my own research, is I'm always looking at agency versus victimization and that continued line between agency and victimization, and thinking of when modesty becomes a choice, i.e. agency, and when does it actually become a pressure, and how do these women, negotiate that, that dynamics within their within that negotiations. One more question that can be out of the scope of that of their work. I'm not sure, but is there any scope for masculinities to be included in that, male perspective, so on? Is there any discussions around that? Of course, there might not be. That's a PhD at the end. It's not an encyclopedia. I understand it might not, but yeah, I'll give you a chance to just comment on what I said.
Okay. Oh, this is really.
Yeah, just don't worry. Just keep it short. That's just my feedback. And then I think we do have yes, Dr. Soe as well. Dr. Soe Tjen as well wants to make a comment. So I'll let you speak first.
Okay. In my study, class differences do appear in some ways, especially in relation to access to education and mobility. For example, participants who have more educational or economic resources sometimes described having slightly greater flexibility in negotiating social expectations. However, modesty norms still seem to operate across different socio-economic backgrounds. And now regarding the sexuality and non-heteronormative identities, this is a very important dimension, but it is not a central focus of this dataset. Most of these participants discussed modesty within heteronormative social expectations, particularly in relation to family reputation and future marriages. But when you said modesty norms can intersect with other forms of social regulation, including sexuality and class, I think that's your point is really helpful. I think, yeah, exploring those intersection more explicitly could certainly provide a richer understanding of how modesty operates as a broader moral framework in society. And also, I forgot to answer the feminism that the main feminism that I use in this study is like intersectional feminism, but I think that could be I can expand more actually. And then about wait, what is your next question? Regarding our surveillance beyond the community level. So in this particular study, the most visible form of monitoring described by participants occurs at the community and social level through family expectations, neighborhood observation, and peer judgment. But however, some participants did also mention forms of institutional influence, for example, within educational environments where certain norms of appropriate dress or behavior are encouraged. Yeah, but I have not yet analyzed this systemically as institutional surveillance. But your comment suggests that it may be useful, to explore the dimension.
Yes. Well, yeah, I have to get you there because we're really running out of time. So if Dr. Soe Tjen, if you have a final, very quick comment before I conclude this this presentation, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So, what I was thinking is because you're discussing Muslim communities, but there are multiple ways of identifying as Muslim in Indonesia. Like Sunisia, Abangan liberal Muslims, and the more recent one is Nusantara Muslim, Muslim Nusantara. Yeah. And also because of this diversity, then I think it's also reasonable to include people who identify as Muslim, but they're not actually religious. Because I met a lot of people like that. And actually I have friends who say, well, I'm actually an atheist, but because of my family, I have to appear as Muslim and I have to pray as Muslim, but I don't believe in God. So I think you should consider this. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soe Tjen. And yeah, I'll let you, consider this comment, Raden, but I have to close this because we're running out of time. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Raden, for such insightful and stimulating presentation. Your work makes a valuable contribution to the broader discussion. Gender, religion, social control has given so much to reflect on. I think there's so much for you to reflect on, so it's so much for us to reflect on as well. My heartfelt thanks also go to our excellent discussants, Dr. Eidhamar, Dr. Marching, Dr. Thajib, and our peer commentator, Nabila. Thank you so much and congratulations. And to everyone who joined us today for your participation and support. The Global South Network warmly welcomes PhD students for all disciplines and from every corner of the world to share their research and receive interdisciplinary feedback. If you're interested in presenting your work or taking part in future sessions, please contact Dr. Nouman Riayat, the founder and convener of the network, at the email address shared in the chat box. All right, goodbye everyone, and thank you once again for such an amazing presentation and such amazing and insightful discussions. And I think we're going to take that for at least a couple of hours after that meeting, after that presentation. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.